Good afternoon, people. How are you doing? As I make this video, South Africa is experiencing a bout of severe load shedding or blackouts, if we want to be more crude. We are having blackouts of up to 6 hours per day. In fact, of at least 6 hours per day, because right now, I think we are at stage 5. But we have just come from stage 6 load shedding, which is about 6 hours a day without power for many areas. It is a crisis, it's true. The question I want, or the topic I want to speak about is this crisis avoidable, or was it avoidable? Could it have been foreseen? Could it have been prevented? I can state with confidence that this crisis was definitely foreseen by professionals, not necessarily by politicians who control the purse strings, but the professionals definitely did foresee this crisis coming. I say so because around 1997, 1998, I was a researcher at the University of Zimbabwe, and I was working on projects that involved companies and bodies in Zimbabwe and South Africa. And some of the research that we worked on included power system analysis and energy forecasting. And I know for a fact that the forecasts that were being discussed by professionals in 1997, 98, 96 did predict that there would be a regional shortage of power by around 2007 and 2010. And if you remember, the blackouts or the load shedding in South Africa started around 2010 between 2007 and 2010, which means those forecasts were correct. Before I go further, let me explain the situation regarding the power, especially the electricity, the electrical power generation in the region. In the region, the most or the cheapest form of power generation is hydroelectric. But hydroelectricity needs large rivers. The region has got 2 large rivers, the Congo River in the DRC and the Zambezi River, which runs from Angola, then border Namibia, Zambia, border Zimbabwe, Zambia, and then through Mozambique. There is already power generation projects on the Congo River at a place called the Inga Dam. On the Zambezi, there is power generation on a small scale at Victoria Falls. There is power generation at Kariba, and there is power generation at Kabora Bus. Hydroelectricity is considered cheap. The other form of energy that is widely used in the region is coal. of which when it comes to coal, South Africa is heavily dependent on coal. It's got very large coal fields. Zimbabwe also has coal powered power stations at Hwange. Mozambique has got coal fields at Mwatize, but I don't think there's a power station at Mwatize. That is Mwatize is a town just north of Tete in Mozambique. So coal is an alternative to hydroelectricity, but coal is expensive. First of all, you need to dig up the coal, then you need to transport it to your power station. With hydroelectricity, the water comes by itself to your electricity generation point. You don't have to do anything. You just build a dam, then the water flows through and you use that energy. With a coal, you have to transport it to your power station. And coal involves heat. And we all know heat weakens materials. As a result, coal carries very high maintenance costs compared to hydroelectricity. Coal powered power stations are expensive to run. South Africa also has access to nuclear powered power stations. But the problem with nuclear power stations is they need extremely high skill levels to operate, to build and operate. And needless to say, South Africa and other Southern African countries are finding those skill levels difficult to acquire and difficult to retain. So nuclear is a difficult choice also. In that nuclear has got a risk of long-term contamination, such as in the case of what happened with the tsunami in Japan, which destroyed a nuclear power station at Fukushima. And similarly, we also have the case of Chernobyl in Ukraine. At the time of the accident, it was still the Soviet Union. It has contaminated a large area such that a town had to be abandoned because of radioactive contamination. So nuclear comes with a very high risk of contamination, which is why it's no longer favored. Yes, it's relatively cheap. You do not need to transport the energy like you do with coal, but the risk of contamination is a problem. People talk about renewable energies. Renewable energies are difficult to use as a base capacity for your power system needs, for the simple reason that renewable energies, the typical solar and wind energies, are dependent on the weather. If it's cloudy, you don't get maximum capacity from your solar fields. If it's not windy, you do not get maximum capacity from your wind turbines. Therefore, you cannot make your base capacity calculations based on renewable energy. It is a nice to have, and it's usually usable during the day and during periods of maximum insolation or maximum wind. But there are periods when it's difficult to obtain energy. People are talking about augmenting solar energy and wind energy with the battery banks. But then that makes it very expensive because the typical batteries that you need for storing solar energy in a large enough quantity to power, let's say, a small town, the battery banks will be very, very, very expensive. So that is basically the energy position. South Africa of late years adopted a go-it-alone approach to its energy needs. It has basically made plans revolved around building power stations in South Africa. I'm talking about after 1994, after freedom. But even before freedom, it was known that South Africa would have problems generating enough electricity for itself as its industry grew and its electricity demand grew. That is why the apartheid government, despite being enemies with the frontline states, built a DC power transmission line from Cabora Bassa in Mozambique to what is now Gauteng, or specifically to the Apollo substation that is somewhere between Pretoria and Joburg. There is a DC power line. I am not sure of the history, but there is also a DC power line that at one point was the longest in the world, from Inga Dam to Zambia. And that DC power line was also built with the aim of giving South Africa the ability to tap into the energy capacity of the Congo River. Zambia is connected to Zimbabwe through several interlinks. I think there's one at Victoria Falls and one at Kariba. In the past, there was only a small interlink between South Africa and Zimbabwe at Beitbridge. But in 1997, I'm talking about a project that was planned by the apartheid government for it to be completed in 1997. The Matimba Nsukamini 420 volt power transmission line was built between Matimba in Lephalale, close to Lephalale or Elisras, and Nsukamini substation, which is close to Bulawayo in Zimbabwe, with the specific aim of supplying power from the north to South Africa to meet its growing needs. So that is the position. If South Africa needs affordable energy, it needs to cooperate with its neighbors that have got large rivers passing through them or along their borders. I'm talking about plans that were in place in the 1990s, or that were being discussed by professionals, by engineers in the 1990s. There is a long-term plan that has been there to build another power station on the Zambezi at a place called the Patoka Gorge. That is upriver of Kariba Dam, but downriver of Victoria Falls on the Zambezi River. And the Patoka power station was planned to augment the regional power supply so that South Africa could then buy power generated at Patoka Gorge. These were plans in the 1990s. And there was also plans or talk of building another DC power line from Inga to Zambia to allow South Africa to again tap into the energy of the Inga Dam. And as part of this strategy, a body called the Southern African Power Pool was formed. The Southern African Power Pool is a body that was specifically designed or intended to allow SADC countries to share power. Those with large rivers and could share power with countries that did not have large rivers. Those with large coal reserves could share power with countries that did not have large coal reserves. So the Southern African power pool was a regional strategy. Because if we look at the case of South Africa specifically, South Africa, yes, has got large coal reserves, but as we have already discussed, coal is expensive. It's a very, very expensive way of generating power, even before we talk about its effect on climate. Even before we talk about its effect on climate and climate change, coal is expensive simply because of the mechanics involved. The heating metals weakens them, and therefore maintenance is high. And also the transportation to get coal from the ground into a boiler involves a lot of logistics. And at the same time, South Africa does not have substantially large rivers large enough to be self-reliant on a hydroelectric power. Therefore, South Africa does need to cooperate with Zambia, Zimbabwe, DRC, Mozambique to ensure that it has got enough power. But South Africa has largely adopted a go-it-alone approach. They want to build their own thermal power stations, which is proving expensive, and they are not building them fast enough to meet the capacity. When you listen to the media, particularly in South Africa, condenses the issue down to an issue of poor maintenance. And by poor maintenance, you should read the racist insinuation that is the problem is incompetent blacks, which is why people are even talking about bringing back white engineers. But what those people who are talking about bringing back white engineers is they forget that in the past 28 years or so since South Africa's freedom, a lot of black engineers have been coming through in fair proportion to the white engineering students. And the white engineers and technicians who were employed before 1994, most of them have reached their retirement age. It's not they are being fired because they are white. Most of them have reached their retirement age. If you were 30 years in 1994, which is a fairly young age for an engineer or a technician, otherwise you were most likely in your mid-30s or in your 40s. As we speak now, you are in your late 50s or your early 60s or even in your 70s, which means you have reached your retirement age. If you have not passed on the knowledge that you had in the past 28 years, then you have a problem. You, the person who is now reached retirement age, if you have not passed on the knowledge, you have a problem. Because the continuity plan was supposed to involve people willingly passing on knowledge to the younger generation, which seems not to have happened. For what reasons, I will not speculate. But as we speak, everyone says the young engineers do not have sufficient skills, which could be correct. But the idea of bringing back the old dogs is not going to work because the old dogs are simply retiring. In retiring, I'm talking about something graceful. Many of them are dying of old age. So you cannot rely on them. Even if you bring them, you cannot rely on them for much more than the next 5-10 years. 5 to 10 years, that's when you can have access to your old experienced engineers, to put it in quotation marks, that even the Minister of State Enterprises and keeps talking about that we need a plan to bring back the experienced engineers. That's not a plan. That's a stopgap measure. A plan should be involved making sure you have sufficiently skilled young engineers to have continuity. So the other aspect of energy shortage that needs to be considered is how has the demand grown so fast? Why has the demand for electricity in South Africa grown so fast? And this is due to very simple political reasons. Before 1994, remember, most of the black population did not have power. The South African government then did not even consider them part of South Africa. I'm talking about the Bantustans here. The Bantustans were considered separate countries by the government of South Africa, even though nobody else in the world recognized them. And those Bantustans, most of them did not have access to electricity. The people there did not have access to electricity. Maybe a very few urban centers, but most of the rural people in the Bantustans did not have access to electricity. Such that at independence, when all those Bantustans were incorporated into South Africa, in terms of the entire South African population, not the South African population that was counted by the apartheid government, which excluded the Bantustans. I'm talking about the South African population after 27 April 1994, when everyone was counted as equal. Only 35% had access to electricity. Only 35%. The electricity generation capacity then was about 38 gigawatts, if my memory serves me right, was about 38 gigawatts for 35%. And the population of South Africa at that time was about 41 million. So that when we say 35%, we are talking about 14 million people, roughly, about 14 million people. 14 to 15 million people had access to electricity. That is, they were connected to the power grid. After 1994, the ANC government embarked on programs to connect as many people as possible to the power network, to the grid system. And as we speak, 90% of South Africans are connected to the grid today. And we are talking of 90% of a population that has grown from 41 million to 60 million, which means as we speak, about 50, 51, 52 million people, 54 million people are connected to the grid. Therefore, the number of people connected to the grid has increased almost 4 times. But the electricity generation capacity of South Africa has increased only from about 38 gigawatts to about 58, 60 gigawatts. Only about 1.5, 1.7 times. It has not kept up with the increased demand. And the increased demand was caused by the political need to provide power to those who were deliberately denied the services by previous racist governments. And if we compare with the regional partners of South Africa, the fact that 90% of the population is now connected to the electric grid system, to the electricity grid system, is actually a plus for the ANC government. Zimbabwe has not achieved that connectivity rate. Zambia has not achieved that connectivity rate. Botswana has not achieved that connectivity rate. Zimbabwe are probably talking at about 70%. Zambia less than that. In the other countries, DRC, Angola, Mozambique, Angola, Tanzania, less than that. So the ANC government is actually done well, connecting its people to the grid. Where they have lacked is the plan to augment the supply capacity. The plans that existed that I'm talking about were done by the apartheid government, and those plans for a long time, because it takes a long to plan a power system, were aimed at providing enough power for what the apartheid government in South Africa, and even though then the apartheid government was mostly catering for a certain race, not for everyone. So that's the point we need to understand about the power situation, the load shedding. That's the main cause is the demand in South Africa is far outstripped. The demand growth is far outstripped the supply growth, necessitated by change of political dispensation to where everyone was given fair access to resources, as opposed to reserving resources for a particular group based on ethnicity or race. That's a fact you cannot change. So the load shedding problem needs to be solved by growth in capacity. And as we speak, there is no tangible discussion of how to grow the capacity that I hear. People are talking about bringing back old engineers to maintain the old plants. People are talking about incompetence and incompetence of certain groups of people, and the usual insinuation is that the blacks who are now running things are incompetent. Yet the people who are really incompetent are the people who made plans excluding the people they live with. Because you cannot make a plan that excludes the people you live with and expect to be comfortable. That doesn't work. Simple common sense. If you want to build a mansion in your village and everyone else is poor, you know that the poor people are going to do a lot of things in Africa. We believe they will be with you. And that is what we believe, yes, if you build a nice house alone and the whole village sees, they will be with you. But practically, they think you have got more, so they think that you deserve to give them and they steal from you, which is the situation we have. can we solve this problem? I don't think it's gonna be solved in the next 5 to 10 years, because that is how long it takes to do proper feasibility studies and build power stations. It can be solved. The region has got more than sufficient energy reserves. The region has got two large rivers, the Congo and the Zambezi. There are smaller rivers, Luangwa in Zambia, and maybe Vau and Orange River. I'm not sure whether the terrain allows for building of large dams, or dams large, or the flow is enough to generate electricity for all of South Africa. But if we take the region perspective, we definitely have more than enough energy resources. So what needs to be done? There needs to be closer coordination using the Southern African power pool of where and how to generate energy and how to transmit it to areas where it is needed most, as was happening before. And that sort of planning will take some time. And it's not unheard of. It has happened. As we speak, Namibia gets most of its power from Zimbabwe. Yes, you might think it's impossible, but if my memory serves me right, the time I left Zimbabwe, Namibia had paid for one of the units at Hwange power station to be refurbished and reserved exclusively for supplying power to Namibia. And that plan meant that a guaranteed power supply plan meant that even if Zimbabwe had shortages, they cannot take Namibia's the power that Namibia has already paid for. Even if ZESA cannot supply Zimbabwean towns, Namibia gets what it paid for. And as far as I know, I'm not in the picture right now. That plan has been going on for more than 10-15 years, and there's been no problems with it. South Africa could enter into similar arrangements with many of its neighbors. There is Cabora Bassa in Mozambique. They get power from there. They could augment the power transmission from Cabora Bassa if needed. There is also, like I said, the Batoka Gorge project that basically has not happened because Zimbabwean politicians have not thought of, Zimbabwean and Zambian politicians have not considered it. Politicians do not consider it important. Politicians, especially in the current environment where politicians work according to election cycles, they do not consider things that are supposed to give benefit 10 years long after they have left the election cycle to be important. They want to finance things that are immediate. If I buy food packs now, people vote for me tomorrow. That's how politicians think. Most of our politicians think. Not that if I pay for electricity now, people will like my party in 20 years' time. No, that's not how politicians think. So those are the challenges that we are faced with. We have to talk about honestly and see how we can solve them. Not talking about those challenges is not going to achieve anything. For today, that is my 2 cents worth. I normally don't like to make comments, especially comments that can be interpreted wrongly politically, because I have got no political alignment. Whether in Zimbabwe, I've got an ideological alignment. I consider myself an African nationalist first and a humanist second. Every human being is important as far as I am concerned. So I am an African humanist. if you want to know what my ideology is. I consider ideological concept foisted upon us by European politics, by European social problems, to be irrelevant to Africa. So don't talk to me about communism. Don't talk to me about capitalism. Those are not African ideologies, and we should not send our solutions to African problems around those European ideologies of a communist, a capitalist one. We should send our solutions around concept of Ubuntu, just being human. That is what us Africans have been about for a long time.